Hello, hello. Welcome to episode number 30. Wow, how about that? Of BINJ Live. I'm co-host Jason Pramas, executive director of the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism. And over here is...
Chris Faraone. Hello.
All right.
That's all I got.
Yeah, that's all you got to have, really. So today we are honored to have a guest from further afield than usual, Seth Stern, the chief of advocacy of the Freedom of the Press Foundation. Welcome, Seth.
Great to be here.
So let's see. I guess we just sort of ease into this. Who are you, Seth?
Yeah.
Tell our massive and growing audience. Yeah, where are you? What's the deal?
Yeah, well, I'm over here in Evanston, Illinois, right outside Chicago, but our organization is based in Brooklyn. Most of us work remotely. We've got people all over the country. We are, as the name implies, Freedom of the Press Foundation, an organization that advocates for press freedom, for public interest journalism. I lead the advocacy arm of things, both sort of public-facing promotion of our issues and behind the scenes policy work, legal work, and so on. But we also do a number of other things. We operate the Press Freedom Tracker. That's a nationwide database of press freedom violations, arrests of journalists, assaults of journalists, subpoenas, prior restraints, and an ever-expanding other category of attacks on press freedom that nobody knows how to categorize because nobody ever thought that they might happen. We also develop SecureDrop, which is a whistleblower submission tool that whistleblowers use to get documents to journalists as securely and confidentially as current technologies allow. We also train journalists on digital security. We've got a digital security training team that does trainings across the country, publishes resources on digital security for journalists, something that is all the more important these days. You know, the law is broken, technology is less broken. I don't want to say it's not broken at all, but it's less broken than the law. So it's something journalists need to protect themselves. And we also focus on government secrecy and overclassification, the Freedom of Information Act. Daniel Ellsberg, the Pentagon Papers whistleblower, was one of our co-founders. After he died, we hired Lauren Harper as our first Daniel Ellsberg chair on government secrecy. And she is filing and litigating FOIAs by the dozen, and also doing a whole bunch of other work to combat the pervasive secrecy and overclassification that is at the federal level that, you know, is perhaps exaggerated now, but has always been there.
Absolutely. Well, this is just all critical work, and thank you, because this is like it's not always the fun part of reporting. I know for some people it is. I know for those who file 100 FOIA requests a day, sometimes it is sport. For me, it's a bit over the top, but we love those of you who do it for us. And I want to ask, I know we have a lot of things we want to talk about. I'm going to constantly pester you with like bringing it to that state level, because I think a lot of the times, and so our reporters who watch this podcast and are wondering like how much of the security do they need to implement? If we're reporting on a municipality or just about the House Ways and Means Committee in Massachusetts, how careful do we have to be? So not that that's a direct question now, but just something to consider as we go forward, because I know I get lackadaisical, I get kind of over the years comfortable with my surroundings, but talking to someone like you, I'm already reminded as to where we can shore up.
Well, Florida is trying to form its own domestic, state version of the CIA. So, I mean, if you're there, who knows? Yes, if you're a national security reporter, worried about your sources being prosecuted under the Espionage Act and so on, there might be additional layers of security you need to undertake. But that doesn't mean that you should just be entirely reckless if you're not a national security reporter. Look at the Marion County Record raid, for example. That was a small newsroom in Marion, Kansas, a town of 2,000 people. And, I don't, no criticism to them. They had no reason to expect that anything like that would ever happen. But, their stuff wasn't really encrypted. They had passwords laying around on Post-it notes, and then the whole police force barges in and takes all their stuff. I'm sure they've stepped up their digital security since then.
And I guess one of the stories I don't know that we're going to talk about and right on your homepage is related to Georgia Fort, who is of course a state reporter, local journalist, and so I don't know if you want to. I know that was one story that was hot on the reading list, and this is of course related to the ICE Church. Are we calling it the ICE Church? The follow-up to an ICE Church investigation, if you will, that also involved Don Lemon in North Carolina, I believe.
In Minneapolis,
Minnesota. January during the whole upheaval there,
in Minneapolis,
because of ICE.
What is happening on the ground right now?
Well, people might remember that Fort and Lemon were charged, were indicted on federal crimes for covering the protests that took place at the church after protesters learned that the pastor at the church happened to be an ICE higher up. The government's theory against them is twofold. One, that they violated a law that restricts people from inhibiting access to reproductive health facilities and religious facilities. They didn't do that. They didn't do anything that is prohibited by the statute. They didn't barge in, they didn't stop anyone from coming or going. They didn't touch anybody. They came in to cover the news. The other was the idea that they conspired with the protesters, sort of a civil conspiracy theory, dependent on allegations that amount to everyday journalism, that they didn't snitch on their sources. They knew this protest was happening beforehand and they kept that confidential. Yeah, journalists commonly agree to not rat out their sources in order to get a story. That's nothing new. And if every time that happens, that becomes a civil conspiracy, a lot of journalism is going to be illegal. Anyway, these cases are ongoing, but recently we learned that the administration had attempted to get a warrant to search through the records, YouTube's records relating to both Lemon and Fort's YouTube channels. Among other things, they were looking for subscribers to those channels, which is odd because what do the subscribers have to do with any alleged conspiracy that Lemon and Fort are involved with? There's no interest in knowing who the subscribers are, except the government's desire to intimidate people who are consuming news that the administration finds undesirable or disfavors. So that brings us to the digital security component, because in addition to the YouTube subpoenas, phones were seized, so a reason to lock down your phone. And there's also this sort of added problem, particularly at the local level, but really everywhere. There's a federal law called the Privacy Protection Act of 1980. The Privacy Protection Act of 1980 essentially says that if you want to search through a reporter's stuff, you need to issue a subpoena as opposed to getting a search warrant. When you issue a subpoena, reporters and news outlets know about the subpoena. They have the opportunity to show up in court, raise their First Amendment arguments, contest the subpoena. In our view, the subpoena should virtually always be quashed. Some judges and some legislatures have a different view, but at least there's an opportunity to come into court and make your case. With a search warrant, you don't even know. The subject of the warrant obviously is not in court when the warrant is issued. So it's entirely up to the prosecutors to make the case to the judge for why the warrant should issue. And in an ideal world, if there are reasons why it shouldn't, the prosecutors are supposed to be candid with the judge and disclose those reasons so that the judge can make an informed decision.
But in this case, the prosecutors are U.S. attorneys under the Trump DOJ.
Right. But even at the state level, prosecutors either don't know. Prosecutors frequently don't know. Without even getting into the ones who don't care, prosecutors don't know about the Privacy Protection Act of 1980 because it is an obscure law that has been invoked a handful of times over the years. Newsrooms aren't raided every day. Most people have the sense to not do that. Phones aren't searched every day. Phones are seized pretty often, searched less often. Prosecutors don't know. Federal prosecutors probably do. And in this day and age, as we saw with the Hannah Nathanson case in DC, and as we saw with the PPA, with the Lemon and Fort case, prosecutors might not say anything for bad faith reasons. They might intentionally conceal the PPA from a judge. Yep. That's a unique issue at the federal level under this administration. At the state level, though, prosecutors just don't know, and judges certainly don't know.
Seth, the Lemon, I get to thinking of all of the, and I know they've done great reporting as well, but there's been a lot of solid reporting that ICE was not happy about, the administration is not happy about. But it seems to me that this was kind of a spectacle. There's video involved. I don't know. I mean, do you have any? I know you're not here to with the opinions, but I'm wondering, have you seen other examples of reporters getting a similar situation for their coverage of ICE, ending up in situations like this, or is this really exceptional? The Lemon and Fort situation in Minnesota.
Well, it's exceptional in some ways that the reporters were indicted under federal statutes that have never been used in any sort of analogous way. But it's by no means the only time the administration has gone after reporters for covering ICE. KCBS is a radio station in the Bay Area. Fairly early on in the administration, they ran a straightforward and routine report about an immigration enforcement operation happening in their community, and they got a letter from Brendan Carr that they were. Brendan Carr is the chair of the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, which regulates broadcast licenses. They got a letter from Brendan Carr that they were under investigation for not serving the public interest, which is a standard that broadcasters are subject to, but which has historically been understood as not a license to censor. You don't get to say, well, my political agenda is the public interest, and you are not serving my political agenda, therefore you're not serving the public interest. Tell that to Brendan Carr, tell that to Donald Trump. So they went after KCBS for just reporting on ICE. And the Associated Press ran a report about how KCBS responded to that investigation. Rampant self-censorship. Reports were pulled, journalists were sidelined, political coverage was disfavored, was discouraged at the corporate level. Really a total 180. What had been an aggressive and political news desk became the opposite of that. And, that's the result. I don't think that Brendan Carr and the Trump administration get that result every time they go after somebody, but that's the result that they're going for. We saw similarly crackdowns on reporting on Kilmar Abrego Garcia. They came after Comcast, not even for anything they said, but for what they didn't say, for not airing Trump's press conference, because they thought there was more newsworthy stuff going on. Journalists are entitled to make decisions about what press conferences to air, pretty basic stuff. And that's not to mention the non-citizen journalists that the administration has gone after directly. Mario Guevara was arrested at a No Kings protest he was covering. Now he's in El Salvador. He was deported. Several other journalists similarly have been arrested by ICE, oftentimes here legally on work visas, student visas, whatever it may be, but determined at least by ICE or accused of not serving the national interest, not being desirable as guests in this country, not because they committed any crime, but because they have different politics than the current administration. And although she's not a journalist, getting back to sort of your neck of the woods, Ramisa Usturk is,
of course, a writer. Wrote unfavorable words. It's
in a student newspaper. Yeah, wow.
I would say so. We're Seth. We're talking about all the people who are who are not in favor, who are those who are sometimes in opposition of the administration. But we wanted to talk about those who are in favor, the friends of the administration, and some of the deals. And we don't exactly have such a regulated media sector to begin with, but some of the things we're seeing now, I know Paramount was on the mind this week and last week. But what can you say about the opposite treatment? So some people that we see have fallen out of favor, or running scared, changing their behavior. But how about those that are changing their behavior, toward more indulgence, toward having more properties, and basically bending the administration however they need to?
Right. Well, on the one hand, some people who have attempted to appease the administration have seen no reward for doing so. ABC paid the administration $15 million to settle a frivolous lawsuit over George Stephanopoulos saying that Trump had been found liable for rape as opposed to sexual assault. I would recommend anyone else who wants to discuss that case against Trump just skip the terminology and describe exactly the actions that Trump was found liable for having committed. Leave no doubt, make it clear. Let's see if he likes that any better. But in any event, they settled that case, and that has by no means stopped Trump from coming after them. We saw just recently that Brendan Carr, speaking of, is going after ABC's broadcast licenses again based on sham pretexts. So that'll teach you something about appeasing Trump, about giving the bullier lunch money and thinking he won't come back for it the next day. On the other hand, though, when you get to sort of a deeper relationship with the Trump administration, not a one-time payout, but an agreement to collaborate in the long term, you see something else. And I think that's what's happening with David Ellison and with Paramount. David and his father, Larry, are longtime Trump allies, as opposed to someone he had to shake down. I don't think Trump had to shake down the Ellisons. I think the Ellisons were more than happy to play ball with Trump. So it's a little bit different than the Disney situation. The Paramount became a property of the Ellisons after its prior owner, Sherry Redstone, agreed to settle an entirely frivolous lawsuit over editing decisions that CBS made with an interview of then Vice President Harris. Trump would have preferred they air a different clip than they did of Harris's position on the Israel-Gaza war. To me, both the clip they aired and the clip they didn't air were pretty much equally incoherent, but they chose.
But he's producer now, right, of 60 Minutes, so he gets to make these decisions. That's how it works,
right?
That's weird, right? That was strange.
So anyway, he sued them over their choice of which clip to air, and it was made pretty clear once again by Brendan Carr that he was not going to approve the merger between Paramount and Skydance unless Paramount paid over some money to settle that lawsuit. It was widely reported that was the belief held among CBS executives, that if they wanted their merger to go through, they would need to settle the lawsuit. Brendan Carr did absolutely nothing to refute that. Had he approved the merger at any time prior to the settlement, he would have taken that off of the table. It would have been moot. He would have disproven it and taken away Trump's bargaining leverage in his lawsuit. He didn't, though. He approved the merger 2 days after Trump got his check. And he's going to
16 million, right?
I have a rookie question about such a merger, Seth, and maybe this is, I don't know, but we're news people, right? We talk about, and I understand that we, in 2026, everything is kind of, all media is intertwined, right? But when those mergers, if there's a legitimate consideration of what should proceed and what should not, how much are the news properties considered as opposed to the purely entertainment properties? Or is it just kind of one lump sum consideration? Because I'm wondering, and also if you could just comment on, we're talking about 60 Minutes, the news, some of the major news properties caught up in this merger. But when I'm thinking about the impact, the consequences of this unbelievable list of properties that is now under one business, what are the what news are we talking about, and what have we already seen as a result of that? What might we expect to see?
Well, in the initial transaction when Paramount and Skydance merged, that meant CBS News changed hands, and subsequently after that settlement / bribe we discussed, CBS had promised as part of the merger review to bring in this bias ombudsman, had promised to make their reporting more fair and unbiased, with Brendan Carr and Donald Trump being the judges of what exactly that means, and they have followed through with that. They brought in Barry Weiss, and as we saw, last week in the latest example, they have really decimated 60 Minutes. They've steered their coverage in a more Trump-friendly direction, and I suspect that we've only seen the start of it at CBS. Now, in the merger currently pending, after Paramount and the Ellisons came through on their commitments to Trump to essentially ruin CBS, he is rewarding them by attempting to fast track their next acquisition of Warner Brothers Discovery. That company owns CNN. It owns HBO, which of course produces tons of news documentaries, and it owns a bunch of entertainment properties. And those entertainment properties, we're focused on the news, we're Freedom of the Press Foundation, but entertainment also relies on a strong First Amendment. What's going to happen to anti-war movies? What's going to happen to like a movie with a black mermaid these people get riled up about? Who knows what
any movie with an evil corporate overlord, which is a lot of them. It's kind of a trope.
Who knows where the censorship will head next in terms of merger consideration. I mean, on the corporate end, I think in most of these transactions, the news holdings are among the least lucrative. So when you've got ownership that is thinking of all of their holdings on equal planes as just sort of commodities, as widgets, they're going to see no problem with throwing the First Amendment and throwing their news holdings under the bus if it means they get to make more money off of their other holdings, whether they be theme parks or whether they be film studios. At the government level, content should not be a consideration. There are plenty of considerations that go into merger approval, antitrust considerations, and so on. Content can't be one of them. The government doesn't get to dictate content. That's the First Amendment. But content under the Trump administration certainly is a consideration. And I would posit that although, notwithstanding what I just said about news holdings not being the most lucrative and framing this as a business deal, for people like the Ellisons, I'm not sure that it is a business deal because it doesn't make sense as a business deal. They're plunging their company and their shareholders into piles and piles of debt to take on mostly losing, mostly unprofitable entities. I mean, some of the Warner Brothers companies are producing like the pimple popping doctor reality show, the My Sweet reality show. These are there's seriously a show, a podiatrist reality show called My Feet Hurt or something like that. So there,
I can neither confirm nor deny that I've seen this show.
So there, I don't think they're doing that because they think it's a good business move, whether on the news side or the entertainment side. I think they're doing that because they want to expand their influence.
Well, and they've already hurt CBS News's ratings. It's not like there's this sudden influx of hard right wingers checking them out at all.
After what they did to CBS Evening News and how that has impacted the ratings, it makes no business sense to unleash the exact same person to do the same thing at 60 Minutes, like the one successful show they still have on CBS. So it's really the only conclusion is it's really not about money. It's about narrative control. It's about the influence. It's about having a major newscaster be controlled by politicians and oligarchs.
Yeah, I think Hannah Arendt's line was always that what the hard right did in Europe, prior to World War II and during World War II was to create their own reality. That was always like a very important thing to them, and I guess these folks are operating in a very similar tradition.
So Seth, we've been, I was looking at our notes from before the show, and Jason and I, we could talk forever about Jason getting bopped on the head more times than he remembers by cops, not to make light of it. My getting arrested at Occupy Wall Street, all things that organizations like yours have come in, and I mean this, super, been unbelievably helpful to us and others in those situations. But times have changed. Things are actually, I think, more dangerous in the street for covering physical protest than ever. At the same time, we are in a new world, and I see on your site, and of course, we have the World Cup coming here to Massachusetts. And it seems that, when I used to get ready, right, going to Chicago for NATO, it's like I wouldn't bring my own orange juice. I get the orange juice there, but you'd have like the bag to put the bandana that, with the whatever it was, the solution for when you got pepper sprayed. There were ways that we prepared to cover events back then. And there were digital, there were precautions that we took. But I feel like when we're to cut to the chase, in covering something, if you're a reporter going to cover an event now, especially if it's, not something you really suspect, a bloody protest, but something like the World Cup or something where massive surveillance state, what are some of these things that your organization is, or I guess not just a reporter, but if you're a person who's going to something, what are some of the discussion points and some things that people really want to consider?
Yeah, I appreciate you're saying not just a reporter, but a person.
Yeah, of course.
That's the issue we keep running into, is these efforts by law enforcement to define who is and isn't a journalist.
I was going to say,
who use these strict credentialing requirements to limit who is, let's say, subject to a curfew, like we're seeing in Newark right now, or who otherwise is afforded some degree of freedom to operate. Of course, constitutionally, the freedom of the press wasn't intended for the institutional press. The institutional press didn't exist at the time. People with iPhones and Substacks and Blue Sky accounts are a lot closer to what the founders envisioned as the press than an Associated Press reporter. So I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, and that we need law enforcement across the country to understand. I was talking about the Privacy Protection Act earlier. That's an example of a law that recognizes it. It is not framed around the protections of the Privacy Protection Act, are framed around whether you are producing content intended to be disseminated to the public. It doesn't matter what's on your business card. It's intent based. It's a verb, not a noun. Yeah. So it's important for everyone to look at it that way. Now, that being said, regardless of whether you're a professional journalist or someone with an iPhone who just wants to get footage, you want to be communicating through encrypted channels, through Signal, ideally. And you want to be setting response times or deletion times, I should say, to a short time frame. Because again, people don't know about the Privacy Protection Act or don't care about the Privacy Protection Act. Your phone can get seized. Your phone can get searched.
And you're talking about literal search and seizure. We, we happen to have written, it's interesting. We used as an example when we broke the story in Massachusetts about stingrays. About the state police getting stingray devices, and we use the example of Foxborough, of where the World Cup is going to take place, because that's a place where they could just drive through the parking lot and they would literally sweep up tens of thousands, data from tens of thousands of phones in one heap. So you're talking about actual, like, if a cop were to take your phone, or are you also talking just about all of this? Is it one big conversation now? Are we just to expect that everything is being swept up like that?
Yeah, I mean, they're right. And if you want to talk about like the Section 702 renewal debates, which are ongoing right now, and with today's news,
2 more weeks, right?
Yeah. And I'm anybody who still votes to renew Section 230 without significant reform after Trump just appointed his whoever that guy is to run DNI, Bill Pulte, totally unqualified political hack. Anybody who votes to give Bill Pulte control of domestic surveillance, control of what searches will be run on Americans' data, cannot claim to care in the least bit about the Constitution. So just, putting that up front. But yeah, there are a lot of conversations going on at once when it comes to digital security. I'm not on FPF's digital security team. I'm not the person to turn to for the in-depth technical expertise and analysis there, but we certainly encourage people to use Signal. We encourage people to not unlock their phone with their faces, turn off all of that stuff.
Yep.
Because there are, just the way the case law is right now, prosecutors will have or cops and prosecutors will have an easier time forcing you to unlock your phone with your face than they will forcing you to type in a password.
How about fingers?
Somewhere in the middle, I guess.
Right.
I can't unlock my own phone with my thumbprint, so I don't know how a cop would ever do it with my thumb, even if they ripped it off my hand. But
yeah, well,
nevertheless,
right.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, maybe they'd be as frustrated. For me, it's 15 attempts every time. I swear to God.
Yeah, well, typing in a password is like that's an affirmative act, and it's hard for them to get you to do that.
Gotcha.
I would say so is forcing you to raise your hand and put your thumb on the thumbprint reader on your phone. Putting the phone in front of your face and making you look at it is considered less of an intrusion under the current Fourth Amendment case law. So if you're going anywhere sensitive, turn that off, I would say. Also, it's really important to just have a number to call, have a lawyer to call. If you're a non-citizen, have an immigration lawyer to call. If you are a citizen and aren't worried about that, still have a First Amendment or media lawyer to call. There's the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. They operate a hotline that journalists who are arrested or in danger can contact if people need legal assistance. There's lawyers for reporters. Depending where you live, you might have local organizations that provide support on the ground that do rapid response. Have those numbers and don't put them on your phone, because if your phone gets seized, that's not really going to help you. You got to memorize them or write them on your body. So
perhaps sorry, Seth. Go ahead. I want to hear.
There's a whole laundry list of digital security tips, and if you go to our site at Freedom Press, you'll find a number of resources and articles by people with far more expertise in digital security than myself that you can consult with.
Perhaps it's me thinking in a classist sense, or just looking at where ICE has concentrated low-income communities, Chicago, right around Los Angeles, and not exclusively, of course, but when I see the president's rhetoric and other officials' rhetoric around the World Cup, I can't help but thinking, like, this isn't something that anybody I know can really even afford to get near. Certainly there's going to be workers who should have concern, international fans, regardless of their socioeconomic level. So I'm not saying I don't see anything. Is there anything that you see that maybe we should think about? Like, is this a big information grab, a data grab? Like, what, or is it there's going to be thousands of international players, also media. Maybe I'm underestimating, so I'll shut up. But what do you see that we don't see? Why the attention on the World Cup?
It is, Trump loves attention. He loves distractions. It's an opportunity to make a splash. I don't know. It's entirely possible that we won't see a major intrusion on press freedom during the World Cup, that we won't see mass arrests of journalists. I don't know, but it is a gathering of a significant number of people where, given the administration's track record, people need to be on alert. I don't want to be alarmist. I don't want to overstate the hype. I'm personally right now more concerned with what's going on in Newark than what might happen at the World Cup. But if something does go down, we need to be prepared to respond, and journalists who are covering it need to be cognizant of current reality. You've got ICE there doing security. There likely will be some immigration enforcement.
The Hells Angels weren't available,
right?
It'd be better, honestly.
Yeah. Where there's immigration enforcement, which there will be, we just don't know how much, there's going to be protest activity. And where there's protest activity, journalists get arrested. People documenting get arrested, sometimes get assaulted, sometimes get killed. So it's not something to be taken lightly. Whether it's going to be, this big blow up relative to what goes on around the country, even when the world is not here for a sporting event, I have no idea. And on the broader surveillance side, that's a bit outside of my wheelhouse, but I agree with that concern that will just be an
we're going to be following for after. We're not done when the World Cup. They're on a shopping spree now, and all those white elephants, all the technology that gets left behind, we'll be following it up. But I don't know if Jason had anything else. But before,
I mean, let's go ahead and pivot to Delaney Hall, because obviously, Seth is working on that. And I mean, you got the situation with a old prison called Delaney Hall, New Jersey. It's being run by GEO Group, which is Wackenhut, for those of you with long memories. The original owners of the GEO Group are these former FBI agents that started a security company in 58, I think it was, as kind of this paramilitary organization. They even wore jackboots and everything from the beginning. So with that in the background, they're hosting all kinds of they're running all kinds of ICE concentration camps, including this one in New Jersey. There's been massive protests, to the credit of New Jerseyites and to everyone else that's been participating. And it's led to quite a interesting political situation for, the governor of New Jersey and for, Hakeem Jeffries and others, the other New Jersey politicians. But recently, last Sunday, I think, a couple of journalists were kettled along with a bunch of other people and arrested, which is pretty off the wall. So take it away, Seth.
Yeah, well, anytime we see protests these days, seemingly regardless of jurisdiction, regardless of whether it's being policed by federal authorities or local authorities, we see journalists being arrested, journalists being assaulted, journalists being kettled. And in addition to all of that, we see these restrictions on access, curfews, these sort of like free speech zones, which to me always have, they bring up thoughts of, the Iraq war protests and those First Amendment zones that George W. Bush had. I think that's where
absolutely
most people first encountered them, but it's since then they've just become so commonplace. It's almost standard operating procedure. Yeah. At a protest, there's a free speech zone, and that's where the
First Amendment's only right over here in this little square that's surrounded, in the case of, let's say, the Boston DNC in 2004, which I witnessed personally, surrounded by chain link fence and barbed wire, the free speach zone.
Right,
abutting the it's exactly great, wonderful. How did that happen?
Right, and and that is it's. There's legal precedent allowing in certain situations where it's necessary to limit journalists or limit protesters to a certain area, but the standard's really high, and the area needs to not be tiny, not be cramped, not be out of sight and out of earshot. It still needs to give, whether journalists or protesters, the kind of access they need to exercise their First Amendment rights. So when you see it being, as you say, like some area down a hill and fenced in between the hours of 1 and 1:30 p.m. Where you can't see or hear anything, no, that doesn't satisfy constitutional standards. In addition, it shouldn't be a default. It should be something that is implemented to the extent it's permitted in response to a legitimate emergency. You can't just assume that there is a need for a free speech zone before the protest even starts. So that's kind of a big problem with the way all of that is operating these days. Curfews as well. That's another component of it. And we advocate for, since we're a press freedom organization, for journalists being exempt from curfews, and for the definition of journalists who are exempt from curfews to be extremely broad. So it also sweeps in those citizen journalists, those people who just happen to have an iPhone and an iPad and are reporting. The basic idea being, if you're not engaged in any illegality, not involved in any illegality, you shouldn't be punished for someone else's illegality. But although we're a journalist-focused organization, curfews are unconstitutional far beyond journalists. Unless there's a really good reason, protesters, activists, people who want to, exercise their constitutional rights in compliance with all other law should not be placed on a time restriction. It certainly shouldn't be a default position, absent any evidence that there's a specific threat that begins at 8 p.m. that didn't exist at 7 p.m. So,
the arguments that the mayor of New York and the governor, mayor of Newark and the governor of New Jersey are making is that they're trying to protect people from ICE by sending in the state cops, busting heads, tear gassing people. It seems kind of strange.
Right. Similar arguments.
Initiating curfews. Yeah.
Similar arguments were made here in Chicago. Like, if we don't take control of crowd, if the local authorities aren't in charge of crowd control, then ICE is going to be even worse. Maybe so, but it's not an excuse for local authorities to go in busting heads. The excuse often made is that when it comes to journalists specifically, is, well, we don't know who's a journalist and who is not. We cannot be tasked with the administrative burden of enforcing, of ensuring that journalists don't get swept in all of these already unconstitutional actions we're taking towards non-journalists. Well, one, don't take the unconstitutional actions towards non-journalists, but two, the First Amendment wasn't intended to make it easy to police journalism. It was intended to make it hard to police journalism. If you're finding it difficult, that's by design.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and sorry, go ahead, Jason.
Well, no, I don't know if we need to say much more about the Delaney Hall situation other than that, I'm kind of curious what kind of political repercussions is going to be in New Jersey for this sort of thing. I think the protests are only going to accelerate because at the end of the day, what we're talking about is a concentration camp in America, right? And we have it here in Massachusetts, a couple of them, right? And people are across the political spectrum are increasingly shocked by what they're hearing. And people need to understand that the folks that are in these camps, basically being treated inhumanely in every conceivable way, are in there for civil infractions in the main, like overstaying a visa. I know the hard right has this idea that, these are somehow criminal acts, but no, they are not, and I'm not going to try to excuse Democratic administrations for their treatment of immigrants because it wasn't that much better, but it was better than what we're seeing here, which are these kind of almost random sweeps in different places that are politically expedient for the Trump administration at that particular moment, and that's why we see floods of ICE, agents, as we are seeing in New Jersey now, wherever there's like pushback, right? So I don't know if you have more comments on that stuff.
Well, yeah. One thing that has come out of this is that a number of journalists, as I mentioned, have been swept up and put into these concentration camps. And the thing with journalists is they're going to write about their experience and they're going to bring attention to what the conditions look like. We were talking about Ramesa Oster earlier. I don't know if she was a journalist at the time she was arrested, but she is now after she's written multiple
effectively
what she experienced while incarcerated by ICE. Sami Hamdi, the British journalist who was here on a speaking tour and who was thrown in ICE jail in California for a short time, for like 3 weeks. He joined an event that we did at Freedom of the Press Foundation. He has spoken out extensively about the treatment he endured, the deprivation of medical needs. Everybody I've spoken to who has spent time in these ICE jails, every single one of them describes the food poisoning they get, they come down with in the first few days there, uniformly. And it's weird because, I understand that prison food is bad, but generally it's like highly processed and canned stuff. So it's like, how do you even make it that bad? That's the kind of food that harms you in the long term, not the kind of food that makes you immediately sick. Like, how do you make someone sick immediately?
There's an old Simpsons episode where the lunch lady's bringing in canned food that's grade Z, circus animals and some filler. It says like, that's basically what they're getting, you know?
There's an incarcerated journalist that I work with, incarcerated in Texas state prisons, not by ICE. But I asked him that question because he's written about food service in prisons. Like, how are you able to make processed food get people sick instantly? And he just told me about how disgusting the food preparation areas are in prisons. And even, like the farmland is, the agricultural side of it is not held to the same standards as the stuff you get at the grocery store. So there's all sorts of gross stuff in the can to start out with. He's talked about like just opening a can of beans and finding a dead rodent in there. It's nasty stuff that these people are being subjected to. And, speaking of, in addition to exposing the abuses happening in ICE jails, my hope is that it will expose the fact that ICE jails are not that dissimilar from the conditions that people all across the gigantic U.S. prison population endure. And while they might not be in for civil infractions, they're also not, rapists and murderers. A lot of them are in for all sorts of, pretty insignificant stuff that people who grow up in more privileged environments also do, but get away with. Even those who are in for something serious, they, in many cases, did decades ago, and they're a completely different person, but they're still having to eat the rat beans. So, it's the one good thing that's coming out of it is that it's exposing all of that, whether it's in ICE jails or in U.S. prisons across the board.
And you have a lot of stuff. You guys, you're all, I know you cover it from a unique perspective, but your site is definitely seems to be a resource for when things like this are popping off.
Sorry.
Let's get that up. Let's get that up for sure.
I will.
We'll put it up in the repost as well. But yeah, we appreciate your time, Seth. For real, this is we covered a lot of ground. I got to say, in less than an hour. I'm pleased.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can shout it out. We're gonna put it up as well. But where, and also what's your primary social media that you all utilize?
Well, we're all over the place on social media. We're on Instagram, we're on Blue Sky, we're on whatever social media outlet
all of the above
prefer for the most part, Mastodon, whatever it is. We're even still on X.
We are too.
A whole other conversation, but we figured we got to reach the people where they are.
Yeah, we are too. We don't use it that much because it's not.
Reach the bots
our audience left. Baby. What'd you say, Chris?
You got to reach the bots where they are.
Yeah, you got to reach the bots where they are. Exactly.
There we go.
And of course, that's our website, freedom.press.
We went .news. I love .press. That's all. I didn't even realize there was .press. I didn't
either, actually.
There is.
I like that a lot. That's very cool.
It's cool. Yeah. It does get my emails caught in people's spam filters sometimes, so I would caution there because my email domain is also .press. But yeah, our website's freedom.press. You can subscribe to our newsletters. We've got a bunch of them. We've got a press freedom newsletter, a government secrecy newsletter, a digital security newsletter, and our U.S. Press Freedom Tracker has its own newsletter. So if you don't want to deal with social media, subscribe to our newsletters. You'll get our stuff in your inbox.
Awesome. Well, we encourage our audience to do just that, to check everything out. Go to freedom.press and plug in, get involved, and realize that this is an organization that a local guy who's passed away in a tragic way, unfortunately, Aaron Schwartz, was directly involved in this organization. So that's enough for us right there. Thank you.
Too. Yeah, he grew up here and ended up there. So right.
It's wild. So Seth Stern of the Freedom of the Press Foundation, thank you very much for coming on BINJ Live. And, if anything else comes up, you want to talk to us and our audience some more, we're happy to have you back anytime.
All right, great. Happy to be here whenever you'd like me. Thank you.
All right. Well, bye, folks. We're going to do that kind of freezing thing we do at the end, and we'll be back in next week with another guest.